Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm going to do my book review on the Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. If that name sounds familiar, it's because she is also the author of the Hunger Games trilogy that came out over 10 years ago actually. The trilogy was called Hunger Games Book 1, Catching Fire Book 2, and Mockingjay Book 3. So this book, The Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes, is actually a prequel to the trilogy. Normally my book reviews do have, I would say, pretty heavy spoilers, but for this one I didn't actually go into the book too much because if I did, I think my review would be like hours long. So this is my rare no spoilers review of a novel, and my rating of this book out of 5 was I gave it a 4 out of 5. And yeah, before I go into my review, as always, I would appreciate if you hit the subscribe button down there, if you can give this video a thumbs up, and if you have any feedback for me, I would love to hear it. And if you have read this book, I would love to hear what you thought about this book and what you thought of my reviews or commentary. I like to always start about talking about the author and giving a little bit of background, as I think it's always important to see the context that the author has in writing this book. Sometimes it's important, sometimes it isn't. So Suzanne Collins is an American author. She was born in Connecticut, which I didn't have to share, but I just love saying that state's name, Connecticut. Her father was an officer who served in the U.S. Air Force, and so she was constantly moving as a child. I believe in the U.S. they call that an army brat, and that's an important attention to bring up of her childhood because the way she moved around all the time, it led to the inspiration of the Hunger Games trilogy. Suzanne studied theater arts major as well as telecommunications in her undergrad, and then that helped led to her career eventually into entertainment. She actually started as a writer in children's television, and even though I feel like she's best known for her Hunger Games trilogy, or at least in my personal experience, which obviously isn't the objective experience of the world, her first breakthrough series is actually a five-part epic fantasy novel geared more towards the younger kids called the Underland Chronicles. And the way she came up with this series is she thought of Alice in Wonderland and how, as you guys probably know, Alice goes down a rabbit hole. And Suzanne thought how it's so rare that someone would come across a rabbit hole and have the chance to go down it. So the inspiration for Underland Chronicles was that she was thinking about how in New York there are manholes everywhere. So this boy called Gregor falls into a manhole and he discovers the world called the Underland, hence the Underland Chronicles, and it's this kind of underground world. And yeah, so this series is really successful. It's a 5-part epic series, like I said earlier, and it was translated to 21 foreign territories. The 5-part Underland Chronicles series was her big, I guess, North American hit, but her first big international hit was obviously the Hunger Games trilogy. And I remember when the first one came out, it was like really popular, so I got it, I read it, I loved it. And then I remember this is the time when I had to wait then for the second book, read it, and then I think the movie came out, and then I think the third book came out. And this is like, I don't know, it's very nostalgic for me to think of the Hunger Games because it kind of reminds me of like when I was younger and I was reading Harry Potter. And back in the day, I don't know if people watching this will remember, I was, I think, 12 when the first 3 Harry Potters came out. So when the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th one came out, I had to like pre-order it, wait till midnight, and then me and my mom would go to the bookstore to buy it. And so the Hunger Games kind of had the same kind of like nostalgia for me, where we had to pre-order book and pick it up and wait, and that was like really exciting. I obviously have aged out of that experience, and I am really curious if young adults nowadays still have that experience with series and that kind of stuff, because now there's also online shopping. We don't have to go to the store, it'll just get mailed to your house. So yeah, if you have that experience now as a young adults reader, tell me, do you guys still have that experience where you order like months ahead and you have to wait till midnight to go to the store to pick it up? Because I felt that was like a really like big part of my childhood when it came to reading. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. So her first big international series was the Hunger Games trilogy. The first book I loved, the second book was great. The third book I didn't quite like. I remember the third book, I kind of just read it to finish it because I was like, well, I want to know how it ends. But I felt it got too political, and that's kind of important to share, as I'll share in my review later. The Hunger Games trilogy also became a movie adaptation, and there were 4 movies total, even though there were only 3 books because, you know, that Hollywood money. Jennifer Lawrence was casted as the Katniss, and then the male counterparts or the love interest was Liam Hemsworth and Josh Hutcherson. To be honest, based on my review earlier of the trilogy, I only watched the first 2 movies. The last 2 movies, which is both Mockingjay split into 2 movies, I didn't even bother watching. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snake came out almost 10 years after the last book of the trilogy, Mockingjay, and it's actually a prequel to the trilogy. And it's not only a prequel of how like Panem came to be, but it's also the origin story of President Snow, who we come to learn in this book. His name is Coriolanus Snow, and it's kind of cool because it's the origin story of the antagonist, and I think it's very seldom that you get to hear the antagonist origin story and how he became the way he is, especially in a young adult novel. And then this book kind of also, like, I think really plays on the idea of how no one's born pure evil, because President Snow in the trilogy was this like really evil guy, but in this prequel we come to learn that he had a lot of choices he made that made him the way he is. To give some backstory of this book before we get into the meat of the book, before the Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes, there was a series of collapses in civilizations. They don't really say exactly what happens, but it alludes to there was like some environmental collapse or destruction, which isn't far off from our reality in a few decades. And basically Panem is created. And it also alludes to that the capital, which is like the capital of the central government in Panem, is somewhere in North America, but doesn't really specify where it is. And then the capital, which is the central government, it operates as a totalitarian dictatorship and police state. There are 12 districts serving the capital in different types of resources. In this book, it alludes to there's only 12 districts, but as we know later in the trilogy of the Hunger Games, there's actually a 13th district. So when the capital makes the 12 districts to fund resources to the capital to benefit the people in the capital, the district over time have rebels which try to overthrow the government. So in doing this, there is obviously backlash from the capital, and they create the Hunger Games, which is a reminder to the people of the districts that the capital has the power and the control, and they will take their children to fight amongst each other to keep that control. And that loosely brings us to the beginning of this book, where we start with Coriolanus, or President Snow. He's 18 and he's about to finish his last year of at the academy before he goes to university. His family used to be a wealthy family. I think they're kind of known as like the old money of the capital, and his father was also a war hero during the rebellion as well. But in over time, his family start to lose wealth, and he has a very strong desire to keep up with appearances, because in the capital there's kind of like the stereotype that everyone is wealthy, everyone's doing well, and no one's suffering because only the people in the district suffer. Traditionally, the Hunger Games, there's a reaping every year, and the reaping draws and reveals one boy and one girl from each of the 12 districts to compete in the Hunger Games. So in case you don't know what the Hunger Games is basically there are 12 districts, one boy, one girl, so 24 players. They're dropped into an arena in the capital, and basically they play until there's one winner. And then the winner, what they win is they win nothing really, except that they survive. And it's pretty messed up because in order to win the Hunger Games, they have to kill 23 other people, including one person from their own district. So in this book, this year's Hunger Games is the first time that each child reaped from each district is also matched with a student of the academy, aka Coriolanus and his classmates of the capital. And the reason they're doing this is because as I guess the years pass, people have been losing interest in the Hunger Games. So to spice it up, they thought it'd be good to pair a tribute from the district with a student from the capital. So Coriolanus is very driven to win the Hunger Games because he really wants to go to university, but because his family's wealth has dwindled for a long time, he can't really afford it. So he hopes to win the Hunger Games so he can win pride and fame for his family, but also so he can win a full ride scholarship to university. But as luck would have it, he gets paired with Lucy Gray, who is District 12's tribute. And this is important to note. She's District 12 because capital is kind of like the central government and kind of like where all like the rich people, wealthy people live. And in District 1 is the first district closest to the capital, and their life isn't great, but it's not the worst. And with each descending district, they get farther and farther from the capital, meaning less resources, and also they're usually more poor the farther away from they are from the capital. So in this situation, Lucy Gray being from District 12 and also a girl tribute, she's not very primed to win the Hunger Games on behalf of Coriolanus. In terms of the plot and the setting of the story, I'm going to stop there because I feel if I kept going, it would be giving too many spoilers, and as I said, I won't be doing that for this review. So overall, I would say that the book, because it was quite thick, it was like over 550 pages. For a young adult's book, it's pretty complex. I feel there's like a lot of themes and a lot of like politics that are in it as well. As an adult, I really enjoyed it, and yeah. So next, I will talk about the characters in the book. As you can guess, in this book, because it focused on the Hunger Games with the 24 tributes and the corresponding 24 students from the academy, there's actually quite a lot of characters, and I do feel that they spent a lot of time showing each character in relation to Coriolanus. But for the purpose of this video, I will only talk about the four main characters that I feel like you kind of have to know. And the first one is obviously Coriolanus. And he's the protagonist, and he is from Old Capital Money. I already talked about him quite a bit, but I find him to be such an interesting character because, as you guys know, this is the prequel to Hunger Games. So in that trilogy, like decades later, he's this evil guy, and he's the antagonist to Katniss and Peta. But in this book, he kind of starts as a good guy. Like, he's this kid, he's 18, he's trying to figure out his life and how to support his family. But then as the book progresses, there's lots of twists when it comes to like plot and also like characters being revealed and how he reacts. And he reacts not always in the interest of what's best for everyone, but also in the interest of keeping face for his family and also his future. So throughout the book, you never really know if he's gonna end up being a good guy or a bad guy, which is like quite interesting because we know eventually he does become the bad guy. So it wasn't until like the very end, it just kept me guessing until they reveal which one he becomes when this book ends. So I feel like he's a real character because I feel the book had so many moments of conflict where I thought about how I would react if I was in a situation. So the only thing I would think he's at fault as a character is he tries really hard to keep up with appearances, and his pros is that he's very good at navigating different situations with his peers, but also with adults throughout the book. As I said earlier, there's like lots of characters to talk about in this book, but I'm just going to focus on three of them in addition to Coriolanus, and I'm picking these three because I think each three of them are a different like slice of building the person that Coriolanus becomes to be, and all three of these people kind of pull at him at different parts during the book to make him like a good guy or a bad guy or creating conflict in his life. So the first character is Lucy Gray. As I said before, she is the girl tribute from District 12. In this book, people align with their districts almost like a race. There's like a race identity, but in district-wise. But Lucy Gray is an anomaly because she's actually a Covey person. So the Covey people are people who, before Panem became the way it was, they were just travelers, they were musicians, and they just kind of wandered the land and just went wherever their music would take them. But when Panem came to be and then the capital was developed, it made people stay in each district. So just by chance, her family and friends of the Covey people happened to be in District 12. And because she's in District 12 and because she is reaped to be a tribute in the Hunger Games, minor spoiler alert, she eventually becomes Coriolanus Snow's love interest. And her character is, she gives hope that she will guide him to become a good person and do the right thing for the greater good. But we ultimately know that isn't so, because in the Hunger Games trilogy, he's obviously married and has kids, and it's not to Lucy Gray. So her character is kind of like showing this love they have and how pure that he could be, and how there's these hopes and futures to shake the chains that the Capitol has on him. So yeah, I think their love is really pure, and it's really nice to see throughout the book. But it's very naive given their situation of him being a Capitol and her being from District 12. The second character I want to talk about, or I guess the third one, but in total, but the second one in relation to in addition to Coriolanus, is Signus, and he is a close classmate of Coriolanus. They're not really like friends per se, but because of their circumstances, they're kind of forced to be brothers or have a brotherhood. Signus' family is originally actually from District 2, but his father was able to bring his family to the capital because of the resources they have in the district. But being born in a district and coming to the capital is super rare. And I think the book says that Signus' family is the first family to ever do that, because it's almost like a caste system. It's very hard to break the social class that you're born into. So Signus, because he had the experience of being born in a district, but then being the capital in his life later on, he sees himself as an ally with the district tributes. And he causes a lot of situations where Coriolanus is forced to have to decide to make a choice on sacrificing and helping the people of Panem, people in the district, or really sacrificing their well-being just so the capital can keep that power and control on people. The last character I want to talk about is Dr. Gall. She is the head game maker of the Hunger Games, and it's her job to make each year more entertaining, more evil, more twisted. She's presented in the novel as this twisted, sick adult, and basically evil. She not only experiments on animals, but she also has experiments on Avocs, which in this book are humans who have lost their voice. I believe it's because their tongues are cut out, and their tongues are cut out as a punishment of the crimes they've committed. So in this book, Dr. Gall experiments on animals, avoxes, and then it's not clear, but it's kind of alluded to, she also has no qualms about experimenting on humans as well. Dr. Gall, as I said before, clearly the antagonist of this book, and she is the person that is kind of the opposite of Lucy Gray and Signus, and she leads Coriolanus to become a citizen of the capital, to fight for the capital, and to think about the Hunger Games and the purpose of it to control the people, and just to make the districts as weak as possible. There are quite a bit of common themes that are throughout the whole book, but I just want to touch on a few of them that kind of popped out at me or felt were pretty prevalent throughout the book. So the first theme that came to my mind was talking about the idea of history and who are the good guys or who are the bad guys, because you kind of get an idea there's the capital versus the district, and in the book it kind of plays out with Coriolanus at first that the capital are the good guys and obviously the districts are the bad guys because there's a rebellion. But as the book progresses, Coriolanus kind of gets conflicted as he becomes in love with Lucy Gray, and just seeing this other side of the world from a district member, and in some part throughout the book, it's oh, the district people are the good guy, and it's the capital who kind of try to suppress them. So you kind of have to there's that theme of who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. It really depends who tells the story, and you kind of have to think about whoever is telling the story if they have any intention to hide or try to convince you to think a certain way. To tie into that, because the second theme for me would be what the idea or the question of what is fair and just, because Dr. Gao, the antagonist in this book, she says that she does these things because the district people deserve it. It is justice, and it's just making things equal for what they did during the rebellion. But is that a good enough reason to cause pain for future generations or current generations? And how long do you have to punish someone until things are equal? because and that's what Coriolanus kind of struggles with, because he was born into the capital and he just learned what he's been told. And throughout this book, he kind of starts getting his mind shatter, and like this glass dome broken of what it means, and he starts questioning like, oh, are the things they do in the capital really right, or is it just like kind of like now being evil just to cause more pain because you can? The third theme I want to talk about is the question of, is any other human's life not life beneath other humans? Because, you know, as I said earlier, the Hunger Games start because it is kind of teaching the districts that they should have never rebelled, and to suffer, their current children will have to compete in the Hunger Games. But like, is it fair that these kids that were totally innocent need to be punished? And if so, like, is it fair that they have to fight each other? And who's to say that people in the capital or kids in the capital shouldn't also fight, so it'll be an equal fight? And then also the question of, why are even children involved, and why not just people who are like the politicians or leaders? Who's deciding who is at the bottom and the top of the hierarchy in Panem? The next theme that's very prevalent, or I guess the question throughout the book, is the idea of selfless choices versus selfish choices. Because Coriolanus is born of the capital and he has quite a bit of privilege and also knowledge, there's throughout the book, like, he wants to come off as someone who is well off, so he wants to help others, but obviously at some point there's a price to pay because he has to care about his image and the preservation of his family. So throughout the book, Coriolanus does things that seem to be a sacrifice at first, but then later on he's like, oh, I can't continue to do that anymore. And then sometimes, especially in relation to his classmate Signus, he would do some sacrificing, but only because in the bigger picture it's really helping him. So is that really a selfless act if he had the intention to really help him in the future? So that's something that the book talks about throughout the whole way until the end. Other theme the book talks about, mostly when Dr. Gao was in the plot, was the idea of if humans are violent in nature, because we like to think that, you know, if we just had free reign of the world, everyone would live in peace and harmony. But in the Hunger Games, she tries to show Coriolanus that given the opportunity, people will try to hurt each other, especially if there's an advantage or if it's motivation to win, and people don't really want to work in cooperation together. And then, as you guys know, in the Hunger Games, in the trilogy, like decades later, sorry if you haven't read it yet, but you probably should have, because it's been 10 years. But in the future Hunger Games with Katniss and Peeta, it's actually amazing that those two, for the first time ever in the history of Hunger Games, they're willing to not be violent to get ahead, and they rather just both lose and die than having to kill each other. So there's that whole discussion of if by nature humans are really violent, and we need society and control and power to keep us not violent, or if in nature we actually can't live in harmony. The last theme I want to bring up that Coriolanus struggles with throughout the whole plot is all the choices we have in life, and when it comes to these choices, the choices we decide to make and how it affects us and what path it takes us. Because in the book, there are many times he makes a choice, something happens, and he feels like he's stuck, but then you always have the power to change your choice or maybe go back. And it kind of talks about like, how far deep do you go before it's too late, or is it never too late and you're always able to make the right choice even if you made 5 of the wrong choices to start with. So now I want to talk about things I didn't like in this book. So originally, when I started this book, I rolled my eyes a bit at the quick and sudden romantic spark between Coriolanus and Lucy Gray, because I feel like, this is a young adult's book. Of course, there's a romance in there between the two characters, kind of like Romeo and Juliet, right? Because he's a student at the Capitol and she's a tribute from a District 12. But as the plot progresses, I realize that Lucy Gray is pivotal to Coriolanus's character because it helps him develop as a person, but also creates a lot of conflict between who he is and who he wants to be. To be honest, I thoroughly enjoyed every page of his book. I kind of wish it kept going or had more details of each tribute in like more fleshed out. The book was quite long. I think I said before it's over 550 pages. However, it didn't feel like it dragged at any point, and I was actually nervous when I started the book because The previous book I read, All the Light We Cannot See, was also quite a thick book, and that book felt like a drag at times. So I was nervous about that for this, but I really enjoyed every chapter of it, and there wasn't any extra fluff that didn't need to be there. The themes that I enjoy in this book, I kind of talked about in the themes earlier, is that throughout the whole book, Coriolanus deals with situations, and it was really fun for me to think about how I would act if in that situation as well, because it's really easy to judge and tell someone how they should react in a situation, but it's hard to say what we will do given the circumstances as well. So we see this through the entire book. I enjoy that Coriolanus was also not a perfect character, despite him being the protagonist of the book or the main character. Sometimes he makes the right decision, sometimes he makes the wrong decision, and at the end of the day, he's human. So it makes sense that all his choices are motivated because ultimately he wants to protect himself and his future, even though sometimes he does seem like he is thinking of someone else first before him, but he is really thinking of him at the end of it all, right? On Goodreads, this book got an average of 3.82 stars out of 5. So this book was released in 2020, I think right when the pandemic started, and it got a lot of mixed reviews. As months passed, it eventually got higher and higher reviews, but overall, a lot of initial low feedback and reaction from readers. So a lot of the low reviews when I was going through it was a lot of people found it long and hard to read or finish because they couldn't relate or understand why even have an origin story of President Snow from the Hunger Games. Because again, I said earlier in that book, he's really seen as this like awful, pure evil person, and I don't think you want to know his origin story or find out how he became the way he is or have any empathy for him, because you don't want to know that he could be a good guy at one point because he's just so evil and he was so awful to Katniss and everyone else in the districts in the trilogy. So I guess a lot of the bad reviews were written by like true Hunger Game fans because they found it really hard to root for this guy. A lot of the 4 or 5 star reviews were kind of like me on Goodreads, where they found the book super interesting to read because there's a lot of nature versus nurture in humans, morality and what society is, and how to live in such a corrupt and chaotic society. One review that stuck out to me was that unlike the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, where at the end you felt a lot of empathy how the Joker came to be in his origin story, that in this book you don't really develop a lot of empathy for Coriolanus Snow because he makes bad choices, he sees the consequences, and he continues to make them. But also, you know, there are times when he does make the right choices. But I'm not going to say how this book ended, but, you know, as you know, in the Hunger Games, he ultimately does become the ultimate evil person. So I kind of like that, but I can see why people wouldn't like it because you don't really develop any empathy for Coriolanus Snow at all. So why I think you should read this book is my number one reason is if any book I read is I think you should read the book because they're making a movie adaptation of this book. They already started production of it, and also Zendaya is casted as Lucy Gray, which I think is a great cast. I think the movie is going to be great because the book is great, they have a strong cast, and it'd be interesting to see what they will do in the movie just because it's such a dense book and they'll probably be limited to just an hour and a half or 2 hour movies top. But either way, even if they muck up all the details and the depth of the book, I think it will be a great movie. Other reason I think you should read this book is because, as I said earlier, things I really enjoy is it talks a lot about ethics and morals and conflict and what decisions you would make in those situations. So if you kind of like that kind of book where things don't always go the way you want and it's kind of like a difficult read, this will be a good book for that to get your brain going. As always, I like to share how this book made me feel because one of my favorite things to ask people whenever they've read a book is how it made them feel, because in the future, if you ask me about this book, I probably won't remember the characters' names or what really happened in the book, but I'll always remember the feeling the book gave me. So for this book, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snake, this book made me feel very conflicted from beginning to the end. That's the end of my review of this book. If you read it, let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you agree or disagree with me on any of my opinions, the next book that I read is The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. I actually already read it because it was a really quick read, and I just couldn't stop turning the pages. So yeah, if you've read this book, stay tuned because I'm going to film it and do my review of this book.